The Black Widow who never noticed him, until he revealed who he really was. Melissa stood pressed against a brick wall in a narrow alley behind a North End restaurant, the cold seeping through her elegant black coat. 3 men blocked her escape, their voices low and controlled as they demanded information she did not have. Names, objects, transactions that had never passed through her hands. Her pulse hammered, loud enough that she was sure they could hear it. A voice cut through the alley. Soft. Calm. Precise. The lady doesn't have what you're looking for. The men froze. A 4th presence stepped forward from the shadows, the quiet customer from her estate liquidation business. The forgettable man in the brown jacket. Except he was no longer forgettable. His posture was different. His gaze steady. The air around him felt ordered, disciplined, final. One of the men swallowed hard. Mr. Gonzalez. The name landed with weight. Raymond T. Gonzalez. A man most people spoke about only in lowered voices. A man no one ever seemed to see. Melissa stared at him, stunned. The most dangerous man in Boston had been standing in her office for months, asking permission to touch furniture. And he had been watching her for 8 months. How did a grieving widow end up here with Boston's most feared crime lord protecting her? And why had he been watching her all along? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. A new story drops tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it. A special shout out to all our viewers, both new and returning, from the United States, Canada, Netherlands, South Africa, Australia, the United Kingdom, and every corner of the world. Thank you for being here and supporting these stories. You're the reason we keep creating them. Let's begin. Boston's Beacon Hill carried autumn differently than the rest of the city. The season settled into its narrow streets with quiet confidence, resting on brick facades and iron railings, clinging to the edges of gas lamps that glowed softly against early evening skies. Rain darkened the cobblestones until they reflected the city back at itself, polished and reserved. History lived here, not loudly, but with expectation. People walked slower, spoke lower, as if the neighborhood demanded a certain discipline from those who passed through it. On Charles Street, between a bookstore that smelled of old paper and a bakery that closed before dusk, stood a narrow brownstone with black shutters and a brass plaque beside the door. The first floor served as a place of business. The upper floors belonged to one woman who rarely felt the need to leave. Melissa S. Sylvester had chosen the building for its separation of space. Work below. Life above. A boundary she could control. At 34, she had learned how to look intact. Her dark hair was usually pulled back with precision, never loose, never careless. Her clothes were expensive in ways that didn't ask for attention. Tailored coats, muted colors, clean lines. Nothing soft. Nothing accidental. People often described her as composed, efficient, professional. They did not describe her as warm. She preferred it that way. 3 years earlier, she had stood beside a grave overlooking the Charles River and listened as earth covered the last physical proof that she had been loved completely. Cancer had taken her husband slowly, methodically, allowing no illusion of mercy. 7 years of marriage, reduced to hospital rooms, careful smiles, and conversations held in whispers after midnight. By the time he died, Melissa had already begun preparing for a future where survival meant control. She had not broken. She had sealed herself. The estate liquidation business came later, born from necessity and a refusal to depend on anyone. Families contacted her when death left behind too much, houses full of objects that could not be kept, could not be sorted, could not be touched without reopening wounds. Melissa handled those objects with calm detachment. She catalogued. She appraised. She sold. She closed doors so others could move forward. The irony was never lost on her. A widow earning her living by dismantling evidence of other people's lives. Love reduced to furniture, jewelry, papers, art. Items stripped of context and assigned value. Her office occupied the front of the first floor, tall windows facing the street, shelves lined with ledgers and reference books. The rest of the space was storage, staging, preparation. Above it all were her living quarters, quiet and orderly. She slept alone, ate alone, worked until exhaustion allowed sleep to claim her without thought. Clients fell into predictable categories. There were the anxious ones, unsure of every decision, who needed reassurance before signing anything. There were the aggressive ones, already calculating profit before grief had settled. And there were collectors, men and women who looked at objects without ever wondering who had loved them. Melissa wore a different version of herself for each group. Her voice adjusted. Her posture shifted. The real her stayed carefully hidden, preserved behind professional distance. She did not invite questions. She did not encourage familiarity. After her husband's death, she had made a decision that guided every choice thereafter. She would not be seen. And she would not see too deeply into others. Looking closely led to attachment. Attachment led to loss. Loss was a debt she refused to pay again. That philosophy served her well. Until it didn't. The pattern emerged slowly, almost imperceptibly. Clients who paid in cash, always clean bills, always counted carefully. Men who never offered full names and never asked for receipts beyond what was legally required. They asked questions that seemed harmless but felt oddly precise. Where had an item come from? How long had it been in the family? Had anyone else inquired about it? Melissa noticed. She logged the details mentally, but she dismissed the significance. Her job was not to speculate. Her job was to sell. Among those men was one who returned more often than the others. He wore a brown jacket most of the time. Nothing remarkable about it. Nothing that suggested status or intention. He was of average height, average build, with dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples. If she were forced to describe him to police, she would have struggled. His face slipped from memory almost as soon as he left the room. He never arrived unannounced. He never overstayed. And unlike most buyers, he never touched anything without asking first. May I examine this? Would it be acceptable to open this drawer? Is it all right if I look closer? The politeness felt excessive. Controlled. Almost rehearsed. It irritated her, though she could not have explained why. Men usually took space without asking. They leaned. They loomed. They assumed. This one waited. He browsed without urgency, studying items as if committing them to memory rather than evaluating them for purchase. When he did make offers, they were fair. Sometimes more than fair. Once, for a Tiffany lamp from an estate whose heirs had argued over every other item, he wrote a number nearly twice what it would fetch at auction. For their trouble, he said quietly when she questioned it. She processed the transaction and moved on. Within an hour, she no longer remembered his face. Her days followed routine. Appointments. Inventory. Calls with attorneys. Evenings spent upstairs with a book she often didn't finish. She told herself she liked the predictability. She told herself solitude was peace. At night, the city continued outside her windows. Laughter from nearby restaurants. Footsteps on wet stone. Life happening without her participation. She watched without longing, convinced she had already lived the part of her life that required risk. Sometimes, though, she felt watched. Not in a way that raised fear. Not enough to alter her habits. Just a fleeting awareness, like pressure behind the eyes. She attributed it to exhaustion. To memory. To the mind's habit of filling silence with invention. When the man in the brown jacket appeared, she felt it more strongly. But she dismissed that too. He was just another customer. Another background presence. Someone who would disappear the moment she stopped paying attention. She did not ask him questions. She did not look closely enough to notice the way his gaze followed her movements, never intrusive, never lingering where it shouldn't, but always aware. She did not notice how his visits aligned with her schedule, never interfering, never interrupting. She did not see how carefully he kept his distance. Melissa Sylvester had trained herself well. She had become excellent at not seeing. And so the most dangerous man in Boston stood in her office again and again, quiet and patient, invisible by design, while she catalogued grief and told herself she was safe. She did not know she was being watched. She did not know she had already been chosen. She only knew that the world felt distant, controlled, manageable. And for the first time since her husband died, that illusion was about to fail. Raymond T. Gonzalez learned early that invisibility could be cultivated. He grew up in South Boston, in a row of concrete buildings where sound traveled through walls and privacy did not exist. His world was small and crowded, shaped by necessity rather than choice. His mother worked long hours cleaning houses she could never afford to live in, often leaving before sunrise and returning long after dark. Some days, when childcare fell through or money ran short, she took him with her. Beacon Hill was a different country. The streets were quieter there. The air felt restrained. Houses stood shoulder to shoulder like they belonged to one another, guarded by iron railings and unspoken rules. Raymond followed his mother through narrow hallways and polished rooms, carrying cleaning supplies that weighed more than he did. No one looked at him. Not truly. Conversations continued over his head. Instructions were given to his mother without acknowledgement of his presence. He learned something essential in those rooms. Wealth did not require cruelty to erase people. It only required indifference. By the time he was 10, Raymond understood that being overlooked could be useful. Adults spoke freely around him. They left doors unlocked. They assumed nothing important could come from someone who did not register as important. He remembered everything. That skill kept him alive later. On the streets. In rooms where power shifted without warning. In negotiations where attention was dangerous and silence was protection. Raymond built his reputation not on volume, but on absence. He became someone people referenced without being able to describe. A name passed quietly. A presence implied rather than confirmed. By 42, he controlled import routes that stretched along the eastern seaboard. Shipping companies with clean records and legitimate offices moved goods that never appeared on official paperwork. He did not lead with threat. He led with certainty. His word carried consequence, and that was enough. He had no wife, no children, no circle of friends who could be used against him. Love was a liability he had watched bankrupt men far stronger than himself. Trust was a currency he refused to spend twice. Still, he maintained habits that grounded him. Every Thursday evening, he sat inside the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, waiting his turn for confession. He never offered details that would require questions. Father Dominic had learned to accept silence where answers could not exist. Raymond did not believe absolution erased choices, but he believed discipline mattered. On Sunday mornings, he walked the Freedom Trail alone. Boston Common to the Old North Church, step by step, tracing a history built by men who had believed risk was preferable to submission. He respected that. He understood it. And every other Monday, he visited an estate liquidation business on Charles Street. At first, it had been practical. 8 months earlier, one of his men flagged a painting that had surfaced quietly in a private sale. A small Monet study taken from a museum in Provence during the occupation, missing for decades, resurfacing without announcement. The trail led not to smugglers or collectors, but to a widow running a legal business with clean books. Raymond went himself. He expected evasion, or fear, or greed. What he found instead was a woman who met his gaze briefly, professionally, and looked away without interest. She explained the provenance calmly. A family selling their father's estate. No indication they knew what they had possessed. No deception. No performance. He purchased the painting for 3 times its estimated value and said nothing about its history. She accepted the offer, processed the paperwork, and dismissed him with polite efficiency. It should have ended there. He returned the following week. Told himself he was confirming she had no deeper involvement. The week after, He told himself he was checking inventory for similar items. Each justification grew thinner. Melissa Sylvester fascinated him because she did not react. She did not recognize him, did not defer, did not attempt familiarity. She spoke to him the same way she spoke to everyone else, her tone steady, her attention precise but limited. She looked past him once business concluded, already moving on to the next task. Raymond ordered a background report. It arrived within days. Clean. Sparse. Born in Maine. Educated in art history. Married to a professor of maritime law. Widowed at 31. No children. No living family. Business formed shortly after her husband's death. No personal relationships recorded beyond professional necessity. The final line stayed with him. Subject appears to have intentionally minimized personal connections following spouse's death. He recognized the choice immediately. He had made the same one, just under different circumstances. From that point forward, he stopped pretending his visits were coincidental. He watched her carefully. Not from a distance. From across rooms. From the threshold of her office. From the street outside, coffee untouched in his hand while she moved through her days unaware. He noted how she categorized people. How her expression softened slightly with grieving clients and hardened with aggressive buyers. How she never spoke about herself unless asked directly, and even then, only offered what was necessary. He adjusted his behavior accordingly. He asked permission for everything. Not as a tactic. As restraint. It was the only way he knew to remain near her without claiming space she had not offered. Touch was ownership in his world. Presence was power. He refused both unless granted. He could tell his courtesy unsettled her. It did not fit her expectations. Men like him, even when she did not know what he was, usually took what they wanted. They leaned too close. They filled silence with assumption. Raymond did neither. He studied objects with patience rather than appetite. When he made offers, they were deliberate. Sometimes generous beyond reason. Once, he placed an amount on her desk that made her pause. For their trouble, he said quietly, meaning the family, not himself. She looked at him for a moment longer than usual. Evaluating. Perhaps considering a question. She did not ask it. An hour later, she had forgotten his face. Raymond remained across the street long after she closed for the day, watching the lights change behind her windows. Watching her pack files into drawers. Watching her move upstairs alone. Something shifted in him that night. Not desire alone. Something sharper. More dangerous. He had built his life on control. On discipline. On ensuring nothing could be taken from him because nothing was offered. Yet here was a woman who had sealed herself away so completely that she did not notice she was being guarded. He could have approached her differently. Revealed fragments of himself. Tested reactions. Men in his position rarely waited. He waited. Because he understood exactly what would happen if he did not. He would break the very thing that drew him. She would retreat further. Close the door permanently. And he would lose her before she ever knew she had been seen. Raymond Gonzalez had ended lives without hesitation. Patience in this case cost him far more. Each visit where she dismissed him hurt more than the last. Each time she looked past him as if he were furniture reinforced a truth he had spent decades avoiding. Invisibility protected him, but it also starved him. Across the street, watching her turn off the lights one evening, he acknowledged something he had avoided naming. He did not want to own her. He wanted her to see him. And he did not know how long he could wait without something inside him giving way. December arrived with a job Melissa could not refuse. The email came from a law firm in California, efficient and impersonal. A 93-year-old woman had died in Manchester by the Sea. No spouse. No children. The great-nephew handling the estate wanted the property cleared before Christmas. Everything. Furniture, artwork, personal effects, letters, clothing. The house would be sold as soon as possible, and delays were not an option. Melissa read the message twice, already aware she would accept. Work was safer than silence. Distance was easier than staying still. She drove north 2 days later, the road narrowing as the city fell away. December light hung low over the water, gray and cold, the kind that flattened color and made everything feel provisional. The house sat back from the road, weathered but proud, its windows dark, its long drive lined with bare trees. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. The heating system groaned awake reluctantly. Melissa set her bag down in the front hall and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet settle around her. The woman who had lived here had done so alone. 93 years of breathing, thinking, remembering, all ending in these rooms. Melissa began the work methodically, room by room, drawer by drawer. She catalogued jewelry, furniture, porcelain, books. She noted dates, signatures, conditions. The house resisted her at first, as if offended by intrusion, but routine smoothed the edges. That night, she slept poorly in the guest room, the ocean audible in the distance, its rhythm steady and indifferent. On the second evening, she opened a jewelry case tucked into the back of a bedroom closet. The exterior was unremarkable. Inside, compartments held simple pieces. Gold worn thin. Stones dulled by time. She lifted the tray and felt resistance. Beneath it was a shallow compartment she would have missed if she had been careless. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, yellowed, tied with a ribbon that disintegrated when she touched it. Letters. The handwriting was careful, consistent, intimate. She sat on the edge of the bed and read the first one. Then another. Then another. They spanned decades. 2 women. One living openly, safely. The other hidden by circumstance, by expectation, by fear. The letters spoke of stolen afternoons, of glances held too long, of restraint that felt like devotion. They spoke of absence not as loss, but as discipline. Halfway through the stack, Melissa reached a letter written on thinner paper, the ink slightly smeared, as if the writer's hand had shaken. I see you. I have always seen you. And I will wait until the world burns or blesses us. Melissa pressed the paper to her chest and cried. She cried until her throat burned, until her face ached, until the room felt too small to contain what had been released. She cried for the woman who had written the words, for the woman who had received them, for the years they had been denied, for the courage it must have taken to keep loving without witness. She cried because she remembered. Her husband had seen her that way. Fully. Without demand. Without condition. He had known her silences and loved her through them. He had watched her retreat after his diagnosis and pulled her back gently, insisting she remain present even as fear hollowed them both. After his death, she had done the opposite. She had learned how to disappear. She built her life around transactions. Around objects that passed through her hands and left no mark. She trained herself not to invite curiosity, not to offer openings, not to linger where emotion could find purchase. Invisibility felt safe. It required nothing. It asked nothing. Being seen demanded risk. Risk meant loss. And she had already lost the one thing she had been unwilling to gamble. Melissa packed the letters carefully, documenting them as personal correspondence to be transferred to the estate's attorney. The great-nephew would decide what to do with them. She suspected he would never read them. Some truths survived only because they were never examined. She drove back to Boston carrying weight she could not set down. The city greeted her with familiar noise, familiar pace, but something inside her had shifted. The quiet she had cultivated no longer felt neutral. It felt chosen. And she was no longer sure she wanted to keep choosing it. Thursday night arrived cold and clear. Melissa ate alone at a small restaurant in the North End, a place she had visited once with her husband years earlier. She ordered too much food and ate slowly, watching couples at nearby tables talk with the ease she had forgotten was possible. This, she told herself, was not bravery. It was maintenance. A small refusal to let herself vanish completely. She paid and stepped back into the street, her breath visible, her coat pulled tight. She took the longer route home, cutting through an alley she had walked 100 times before. Halfway through, she sensed movement. 3 men stepped into her path, blocking the narrow space with casual precision. Their clothes were ordinary. Their expressions were not. One of them spoke her name. The sound of it, spoken without warmth, froze her. They asked questions she did not understand at first. About items that had passed through her business. A painting. Documents. Names she did not recognize. She told them the truth. That she did not knowingly deal in stolen property. That she maintained records. That everything she sold was acquired legally. They did not listen. One man moved closer. Not touching her. Not yet. His proximity alone tightened her chest. She thought of all the ways she had imagined death since her husband died. Illness. Accidents. Quiet endings. Never this. Her throat closed. Her hands shook. She understood, suddenly and completely, how little protection her careful invisibility offered her now. She had believed that if she stayed small, the world would pass her by. It had not. Before she could speak again, the men stopped. Not because she had said anything different. Because someone else had entered the alley. A presence settled behind them, unhurried, unmistakable. One of the men turned, recognition flashing across his face, followed by something like fear. Raymond's voice cut through the space, calm and absolute. He did not raise it. He did not threaten. He stated a fact. This ends here. The men retreated without argument, without apology. They left as if the decision had never been theirs to make. Melissa stood shaking, unable to move. Raymond stepped toward her, stopping at a careful distance. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw something she had missed before. Not power alone. Control held deliberately, as if any misstep could cause damage. He waited for her answer. In that moment, Melissa realized something that frightened her more than the men had. She had been seen. And she did not know whether she was ready for what that meant. Melissa remained where she was long after the men were gone, her back still pressed to brick, breath uneven, fingers numb from cold and shock. The alley had returned to its ordinary quiet, as if nothing unusual had taken place. The world had not stopped. Only she had. Raymond stood a few steps away, his hands visible, his stance deliberately open. The brown jacket he usually wore was gone, replaced by a tailored coat that fit his frame with purpose. The softness she remembered was still present, but it was layered beneath something heavier. Something disciplined. His eyes held her without apology. She understood, finally, why the men had fled. "You don't have to stay," he said. His voice was the same one she had heard in her office for months. Calm. Careful. Never raised. "I can't move," she replied, surprised by her own honesty. He nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. One of the men had spoken his name. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The sound of it alone had been enough. "Mr. Gonzalez." Melissa tasted the words again, realizing how often she had heard them whispered in other contexts. Business dinners. Charity boards. Conversations that quieted when she entered a room. She had never connected those murmurs to the man who asked permission before touching a chair. "You should run," she said, though she made no effort to do so. "Yes," Raymond agreed. "But you won't." He waited. Did not reach for her. Did not hurry the moment. He had learned long ago that force was unnecessary when fear was already present. "I've been watching you for 8 months," he said. The words landed with weight, but not surprise. Some part of her had already known. "You traced something through my business," she said. "Yes." "And stayed." "Yes." "Why?" Raymond considered her carefully before answering. Not because he lacked the truth, but because he respected it. Because I saw you disappear, he said. And I knew how that happens. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. You don't know anything about me. I know loss, he replied. I know discipline. I know what it costs to keep breathing when the thing that made breathing worthwhile is gone. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. I won't hurt you, he said. Tonight or any other night. You already scared me, she said. Yes. He did not excuse it. Come with me, she said suddenly. The words startled them both. My place, she clarified. I won't talk here. It was reckless. She knew it even as she said it. The last time she had invited a man into her home on instinct, she had married him 3 months later. Raymond studied her face, reading the resolve beneath the fear. Only if you choose every step, he said. No assumptions. No debts. She nodded. They walked together, not touching, the distance between them deliberate. The brownstone on Charles Street stood quiet when they arrived, its windows dark, its door familiar under her hand. Inside, she turned on the lights of her office. The room looked exactly as it always did. Clean. Neutral. Controlled. The place where other people's lives passed through her hands and left behind no residue. Raymond stood near the doorway, waiting. You can sit, she said. I'm fine. She took off her coat and draped it over the back of her chair, the motion grounding her. She needed something ordinary to hold on to. Tell me, she said. He did not pretend confusion. I've ordered people killed, Raymond said. Not to protect myself. Not always quickly. I've made decisions knowing they would end lives. She watched his face as he spoke, looking for hesitation, embellishment, regret crafted for effect. There was none. I built what I control by learning when to apply pressure and when to disappear, he continued. I learned early that being overlooked is a form of power. People tell you things when they don't see you as a threat. Her stomach tightened. She thought of Beacon Hill kitchens. Of children brought along while their mothers cleaned. I am not a good man, he said. I don't want forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. Why tell me this? She asked. Because you deserve the truth, he said. And because anything less would be manipulation. She absorbed that in silence. When my husband died, Melissa said, I decided there would be no more surprises. No more moments where the ground vanished beneath me. I trained myself to fade. Raymond listened without interrupting. I deal in possessions of the dead, she continued. I watch people dismantle their pasts piece by piece. I tell myself I'm helping. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just hiding among things that no longer matter. You matter, he said. She flinched. That is not something you get to decide, she replied. No, he agreed. It's something you allow. She looked at him fully now. At the man she had dismissed, forgotten, categorized as harmless because he had asked too carefully, spoken too softly, taken up too little space. You saw me, she said. Yes. And I refused to look. Yes. The room felt smaller, not because of his presence, but because of her recognition. I won't belong to you, she said. I won't be protected without my consent. I won't trade one form of confinement for another. I don't want ownership, Raymond replied. She raised an eyebrow. Power teaches you what not to want, he said. Ownership breeds carelessness. I won't risk that with you. What do you want? He met her gaze steadily. To be seen by you, he said. And to keep seeing you. At whatever pace you set. For as long as you allow. And if I never allow anything more? Then that is the shape it takes. She studied him, searching for the familiar hook, the hidden demand. She found none. You could take, she said quietly. People like you always do. Yes, he replied. But I won't. Why? Because you are not an object, he said. And because wanting does not grant permission. The words settled into her, unfamiliar and dangerous. Melissa exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her loosen that she had kept clenched for years. "Stay," she said. "Not tonight. Not here. Just stay present." Raymond inclined his head, the gesture restrained, respectful. "I will," he said. For the first time since her husband's death, Melissa did not retreat from being seen. And for the first time in his life, Raymond did not reach for control to keep what he wanted. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if the city itself needed time to accept that things could soften again. Raymond never arrived without invitation. Sometimes weeks passed without seeing him. When he did come, he came prepared to leave at the first sign she wanted space. That restraint mattered more than any grand gesture could have. He answered her questions without polishing the truth. When she asked about his work, he spoke plainly, neither glorifying nor minimizing it. When she asked how someone like him learned patience, he told her it had been learned the hard way, through watching people ruin what they wanted by reaching too quickly. He never asked her to confess anything in return. He let silence belong to her. He brought her books. Not flowers. Not jewelry. First editions of titles she had mentioned once, months earlier, in conversations she barely remembered having. He never announced the effort. He simply placed them on her desk, wrapped carefully, as if objects deserved dignity too. Melissa noticed how little he touched her. How often he waited for her to bridge the space. How he watched her face more than her body, as if expression mattered more than proximity. They walked often, usually without destination. One evening, as the river caught the last light of day along the esplanade, she stopped short and faced him. "Being known like this," she said, choosing the words carefully, "it unsettles me." Raymond did not argue. He did not reassure. "I can stop," he said. The offer was immediate. Real. She searched his face, then shook her head once. "I didn't ask you to." He waited. "I'm not ready," she added. "But I'm less unready than I was." For a moment, he stared at her as if he needed to recalibrate his understanding of the world. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Not often. The sound surprised them both. It softened his expression in a way she had not seen before, loosening something guarded and precise. Melissa felt it then, unmistakably. This was not safety built on control. This was trust forming through choice. No promises had been made. No claims staked. Nothing dramatic marked the moment. And yet she understood with quiet certainty that this measured closeness, this careful attention, was progress. It was not everything. It was more than enough. May arrived quietly, with open windows and the false confidence that danger had learned its place. Melissa was locking up her brownstone just after dusk when hands closed around her arms with professional precision. There was no shouting. No wasted movement. 3 men moved her into a waiting vehicle as if she were an item already accounted for. She did not scream. Fear took her breath, but anger followed close behind. Not at Raymond. At herself. She had known better than to believe closeness came without cost. She had mistaken care for immunity, trust for protection. The ride blurred into motion and restraint, time stretching thin until the vehicle stopped and concrete replaced pavement. They kept her in a warehouse outside Fall River. Bare walls. A single chair. Questions repeated in different orders. They wanted leverage, not answers. She gave them nothing but silence and the steady certainty that Raymond would not bend, no matter what they did to her. At 3 in the morning, the balance shifted. There was no announcement of his arrival. No raised voice claiming authority. The space changed without warning. Movement where there should have been none. Sound that cut short before it could register as pain. The men who had taken her did not leave under their own power. Raymond found her sitting upright, wrists bound, eyes fixed forward. He dropped to his knees in front of her as if gravity had finally claimed him. His hands shook as he freed her, the control she knew so well stripped away by the sight of her unharmed but taken. "I'll disappear," he said, the words forced out, raw and immediate. "I'll leave. I'll make sure no one ever finds you. This ends now." She took his face in her hands, grounding him, refusing the distance he was offering as penance. "No," she said. "That's not safety. That's absence." He looked at her, waiting. "I'm choosing to stay," she continued. "Not because you saved me. Because I know what this costs, and I'm choosing it anyway." "I won't own you," he said, the vow steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "I won't be owned," she replied. "But I'm not walking away." Understanding settled between them, quiet and exact. Choice, not possession. Commitment without erasure. When he helped her to her feet, he did not carry her. He stood beside her, close enough to shield, far enough to respect what she had claimed for herself. The night did not end with relief. It ended with clarity. Love had never been safe. But it was real. Life settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. Melissa continued to run her estate liquidation business with the same precision and discretion as always. Her brownstone remained her sanctuary, her routines untouched. Raymond arrived only when invited, never assuming her consent, his presence a steady anchor rather than a storm. She attended dinners with his associates, a careful observer who understood leverage, persuasion, and the subtleties of human behavior. Her insight, honed over years of cataloging lives and possessions, proved invaluable in negotiations that required tact more than intimidation. Raymond adapted in ways that surprised him. Decisions he once made unilaterally were now matters he discussed with her, often seeking her perspective before acting. He learned to restrain impulse, to measure outcomes against their shared understanding rather than his own instincts alone. Melissa noticed the shift in him not as a change she forced, but as a reflection of the respect he now offered her. One evening, after a particularly delicate arrangement with a shipping partner, one of his lieutenants remarked on how different Raymond had become. Melissa replied quietly, almost dismissively, "I haven't changed him. I only showed him what he was always capable of." The truth lingered between them. This relationship was not about possession or dominance. It was about recognition, awareness, and mutual regard. Melissa discovered a new confidence, a sense of agency she hadn't realized she could reclaim. Decisions in her business and in her life were hers to make, and Raymond did not interfere. He reinforced her judgment rather than overshadowing it. Raymond, in turn, learned that his strength was magnified, not diminished, when he included her in choices that once belonged solely to him. Together, they established an equilibrium neither had anticipated. Trust was no longer an abstraction but a practice. Boundaries existed and were honored. Control was shared, not seized. And in the quiet spaces between appointments, meetings, and negotiations, they explored what it meant to be present for one another, fully aware that independence and closeness were no longer mutually exclusive. The balance they achieved was neither fragile nor forced. It was deliberate, considered, and earned. A structure built on choice, not obligation, on respect rather than fear, on partnership instead of possession. A year had passed since the night Raymond first revealed himself. The anniversary found them standing on the widow's walk of the Manchester-by-the-Sea mansion, the same place where Melissa had uncovered letters that had shattered and reshaped her understanding of connection. Raymond had purchased the house quietly, without fanfare, preserving the spaces that had held someone else's most private moments. Melissa leaned against the railing, gazing at the Atlantic stretching beyond the horizon. She spoke softly, recounting the years she had spent constructing a life behind walls of caution, how she had watched without being seen, how she had shielded herself from intimacy to avoid loss. Raymond listened without interruption, absorbing each word with the patience and presence that had become his signature. "I was becoming like her," Melissa said, "observing life without fully living it." Her eyes met his. "Until you appeared." He reached for her hand, steady and certain. "I love you," he said simply. No declarations of ownership, no expectations beyond the truth of the feeling. Melissa felt the weight of months, the relief of recognition, and the quiet thrill of being chosen, not possessed. She responded with honesty, "I've known for months. And yes, it frightens me, but less than the emptiness of being invisible." Raymond's expression softened, a rare vulnerability mirrored in the lines around his eyes. Together, they turned from the expanse of the sea, walking back toward the house, toward a life they were building deliberately. "Which home?" he asked as they reached the doorway. Melissa smiled fully, without reserve. "Ours." In their Beacon Hill brownstone, independence and closeness intertwined seamlessly. A widow and a man who had once been unseen had discovered a rhythm neither had expected. They had created a home that honored individuality while nurturing partnership, a space where love existed as choice, trust was cultivated, and being seen meant everything and nothing at once. Their story did not resolve in perfection, but in reality, complex, demanding, and wholly theirs. They had found each other and, in the process, themselves. If this story moved you, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's story, another journey you won't want to miss. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful, gripping stories directly to you every single day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Wishing all of you a joyful and peaceful Christmas. May your holidays be filled with love, laughter, and moments that make your heart full. Thank you for being part of our story. Here's to more adventures together in the new year.